So let's go on to our first speaker. So our first speaker will talk to us about exploring different recruitment strategies for clinical research lessons from Cytosponge trial. So she is Irene Beecham. So she's currently the principal research nurse of BEST4 trial in CRUK Cambridge Centre Early Cancer Institute. So BEST4 trial is a randomized controlled multi-center trial of targeted screening using Cytosponge TFF3 test. And they are looking into recruiting 428,480 in the primary care and then 1,900 participants in the secondary arm, involving 12 sites, including Cambridge University hospitals.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, and I'm really glad to present some of the strategies we have used to boost recruitment here at Cambridge, but some of our multi-center studies as well. As Cherry said, my name is Irene Debiram-Beecham. I'm sorry if I can't see many people, so if there's any issues, please can somebody raise them during the talk. As I say, my name is Irene Debiram-Beecham. I've worked on the Cytosponge trials for over 17 years. And in that time, I've seen the technology develop, but also it's given me the opportunity to implement the training pathway and to be involved in some really exciting trials. So I hope I can bring some benefit from my experience to some of you and really highlight some of the areas of recruitment we've targeted over that time. So just to give you some insight into what the Cytosponge is, the Cytosponge is really an alternative to endoscopy. It can be used in tandem with endoscopy to make a diagnosis, but really it's for patients with heartburn and acid reflux. I'll just start this video so it shows you how it works. And it's also used for patients with Barrett's esophagus surveillance. Again, it's a little capsule on the string, which when swallowed with a glass of water goes down into the stomach. The gelatin capsule dissolves, releases the sponge, and then it's pulled back up the esophagus, collecting cells all along the esophagus, as you can see here. That sample is then sent off to the labs. It is analyzed, and then we can give a patient a diagnosis to see whether there's any progression of their Barrett's or whether there is a diagnosis regarding their esophagus in relation to the symptoms they've got. So just to let you know, so some of we've used this novel technique for obtaining and analyzing the tissue samples from esophagus, and this device was designed by Professor Rebecca Fitzgerald here at Cambridge with her team, me included. And we have carried out, as you can see on my slide, multiple trials to get it to this stage. As I said, it's a pill on a string, and it is less invasive than an endoscopy. Most patients find it really acceptable and are quite, they prefer it instead of an endoscopy because it's less invasive. So really we triage the patients to see which group of patients it's appropriate for. And as I say, they find it much more, and for those of you who don't know what an endoscopy is, it's the camera down the esophagus, which is the alternative. So we've carried out studies both in primary and secondary care. We've done studies nationally and internationally. So I think we've had quite a good exposure to how we target different groups of patients, and really looking at how we sort of focus that material to really be of some interest to different patient groups. The profile of the Cytosponge really rose during the height of the pandemic, only because a lot of endoscopy departments were closed to non-routine procedures. And therefore, a lot of the clinicians were looking for an alternative to endoscopy. So really, this test was in a research setting, but things sort of developed rather quickly during the pandemic because we had a number of patients who were not actually receiving any sort of surveillance or any sort of investigation for their symptoms. So it's been quite a learning curve during that time, and but it has paid off in the end, and it's actually highlighted how important the Cytosponge is for patients within this sort of category, or with symptoms of heartburn and acid reflux and Barrett's esophagus condition. So some of the key things, sorry, my slides keep moving. Some of the key things that that we took into account when we were looking at sorry, I'm going to move that. That we were looking at the way we sort of design, advertisement, etc., and looking at the patient group and really looking at how we target certain population groups. So during the time and all the studies, I mean, this has developed over time, and we sort of worked this into our, our large study best 4 now. We're working with quite a multiple of disciplines to really get this right. So we've worked in the past with patients and patient groups to make sure that the wording is right on your advertisement or on your patient information sheet, and really this is before you even set words onto a protocol, and really looking at using focus groups. We've also very lately, I mean, in our last couple of trials, we've kind of worked with behavioral scientists and really getting the right wording to our patient information sheet, and also in sort of leaflets and advertisements that go out, and really working with them to see what the appropriate outreach approaches would be. We've also, this is not done in isolation. We also work with healthcare providers such as GP practices and partners within secondary care, really to make sure that the information we put together is really targeted at those different patient groups and can be used effectively. We connect with other non-profit organisations, such as we've worked with Heartburn and Cancer UK in this instance, because they promote sort of the risk of having esophageal cancer with heartburn and acid reflux, and they've got a real incentive to really seeing the Cytosponge being adopted out there in clinical practice. So we've worked with them in the past really to make sure that we're reaching the different patient groups, and also we've worked with patient advocate groups as well, and really looking at all various aspects of how we target various populations, and what are the barriers to really not getting different patient groups in. We've worked with patient-centric partners. The clinical research networks are brilliant in that some of them have got a comms team that you could work with and getting the right tone in your advertisement out there. Displaying patient information on GP media in practices, working with different patient groups and families, really. So those are some of the sort of areas, when you're developing your patient information sheet or your patient leaflet, is really getting a team approach to this and getting it really at the right level and balance to aim to your particular patient group. For Best 4, we're using digital technology, and we're using a platform called iPlato, really because of the number of patients we need to send out this invite to. We're looking at over 4 million to get 400,000 responses. So that's a big population to really just send out letters. So we've had to look and be much more, I suppose, look at the ways we're working and really utilize the digital technology out there to help us in promoting this level of recruitment. We've also looked at, if you're targeting certain population, deciding on and the size of your recruitment is also looking to make sure that you've got localized areas and clinics and labs to sort of see your patient, collect your samples, and get those analyzed. So really, it's looking at the whole picture, not just areas of recruitment, but also looking at post-recruitment, making sure you've got the facilities to kind of see these patients. We run a number of studies in tandem, and therefore we've got some sort of patients who are really research focused and are quite keen in taking part in multiple trials. And it's also looking at how you manage that. You make sure patients are not overburdened in getting too many invites, or probably just taking part in one study, seeing where best your patient fits within your portfolio of studies. If we're screening patients and really if they don't meet that particular study criteria, we look across board at our portfolio of studies to see where best place that patient could go into. So really utilizing that response to the best you can. And using patient follow-up services, we're implementing automated texts, doing little email nudges. Sometimes that can be, we've had some feedback for some patients where they've received letters, but really, sending out an email is a bit too far. They only want the letter, and that's sufficient, and they put it in their diary and they're there. But so it's really balancing that approach and making sure that you're not over communicating with your patients, but really targeting it at the right level. Also looking at whether telephone reminders or texting is an option for your studies, another way of sort of engaging and sort of making sure you use all avenues of contacting your patients. One of the key things with all the trials we've done along the years is really keeping that patient retention. Because for some of our studies, we've got prospective sampling, and really to make sure that your patient feels valued every time they come to see you. It's special. Giving that patient a positive experience is so important, and that sometimes happens, and sometimes we do fail miserably in that respect. But it's how we rescue that and make good out of it. So some of the things we've employed over the years is things like doing newsletters and keeping patients engaged. So we do newsletters, send them out, emails of publications. We worked with CRUK for one of our trials. I think it was the Best 3 trial, where we designed, helped them with sending out a thank you card post the patient participating in the study, and that really had an impact. We got some really nice emails and some letters back from patients saying what a nice touch that was. It really made them feel valued in taking part, and they were, they'd be quite keen to come back and take part in any other trials we're carrying out. So therefore, the key thing here is to make that patient experience a positive one as well. So, as I said, and just to recap from some of the things we're seeing, is using particular bespoke user testing approach to develop your patient information leaflets. And some of you might have sort of access to some of this resource. But for some of us, some of the teams out there, you may not have that. But you could. I think with this network, you could potentially sort of post questions as to where you can access that sort of help and that sort of advice. And so involving a lot of time up front, working with what's your target population for recruitment, what's your content going to be, the format it's going to take, and the appearance of your patient information leaflet. It's time well spent. Also, in some of our studies, some of the things we've used to insensitize patients to take part was, for instance, easy access to the unit, easy access to clinics, making sure it's in an area where public transport is accessible, or they can park freely, or there's easy parking. Sometimes reimbursing them for their travel is also an incentive. We've had studies where, in the past, where they've had to starve for 4 hours or so. Maybe a little touch is if you've got the funding, is to provide them with a voucher for a sandwich and a drink or something. So these are all things to insensitize your patient for taking part. Also, we found that over the years, giving patients clear communication and directions to the facility is so important. That it relieves some of that stress and anxiety to them taking part in a really invasive procedure, or taking time out of their day to come and see you. If they've then had to, be flustered by trying to get to your department, that can always put patients off as well. So some of the key things we've also implemented over the years is to set up a 24-hour call service. Again, if you're going to boost your recruitment, you want to make sure that when that patient phones in or they contact you, you're able to deal with it in a timely manner. And so we've rediverted phones so that there's always somebody at the end of that phone to take the call, or they can leave a message and you get back to them in a timely manner. So I just really wanted to highlight one of the scenarios. And during the pandemic, we, as GPs were all shut down to research. We weren't actually, the resource, accessing the GP for space was really out of the question. And so we had to think outside the box as to what our recruitment strategy would be. And so we worked quite closely with the Heartburn and Cancer UK charity to set up this mobile unit. It was first of its kind in providing this sort of service, where we could deliver the sponge tests in a mobile unit. And of course, we wanted to make sure it was safe for patients, so we did it in an area where we had easy access to emergency services if we needed it. And as our confidence grew, then we diversified where we could put the mobile unit, and therefore that kind of helped with diversifying our cohort. So we worked quite closely with the comms team in primary care, really making sure the adverts were right. They were going out, they were placed on things like Facebook. I never thought Facebook would work so effectively in patient recruitment, but it did. And it worked well in some areas, but didn't in others. So, you have to kind of weigh up what's your best approach. And sometimes, if you give yourself a timeline as to how long you use that approach and whether it's working, to then switch to another, and really depends on the timeline you've got with your project as well. We use newspapers, GP displays, various media coverage. So it's getting high profile people to kind of really put the message across there, so that it raises the profile of your study, it raises the profile of your investigation or your test. And so we used some radio and television broadcasts, and that really promoted the recruitment rates. But also you need to judge how often you do that, really, to get that spike of recruitment. And also working with different stakeholders, sort of primary and secondary care and the commercial sector, really enlightened us into how we did this. We presented at various settings. I worked with different patient forums. The team worked with doing presentations to GP forums. We went as far as doing the the Women's Institute. We worked with various patient groups. We did various publicity with Heartburn and Cancer UK. We did the Mill Road Fair here in Cambridge, which is held in a very diverse area within Cambridge itself, and really raising the profile of our studies and really bringing it home to patients. We did various posters, plot posters, where we could put this up and really draw in people from the public to have a look to see what we were doing. We've worked with religious leaders in various sectors, really, engaging with them, seeing how best we could target our patient information leaflet, whether we needed to get it translated into various languages, etc., to really draw in those patients from different cultures and making research not just something that somebody else do, but bringing it home to them and say, making it part of the different ethnic diversity. We've looked at, because our the disease we're looking at with Barrett's and heartburn and acid reflux really is more of your typical male over 50 who suffers with this. We've looked at those sorts of groups, so like the British Legion really sort of put in some publicity out there and seen whether they would be interested in taking part. So I've done, with my colleagues, we've looked at also doing science fairs. I've done science fairs here in Cambridge, been as far as Norfolk, and really extending that level of communication to wider populations and getting people more interested. So there is quite a lot of work, and you're thinking, oh, crikey, where do we start with this? But start small and build up. And that's what we've done over the years. So my advice is, when setting up a project, is to make sure that you identify the relevant areas of recruitment and make this as broad as possible. And also add this into your protocol so that it doesn't limit you as to where you advertise. Make sure you advert that can work both in multiple locations, and make sure your patient has positive experience, because word of mouth is a very powerful tool and can raise your awareness of your study, but it can also deter recruitment as well. So I hope this has been insightful and highlights a few options if you're struggling to recruit. I believe there is also a session later on that talks about using AI to facilitate recruitment, and I'm really looking forward to seeing that later on. But the important thing with this is to remember it's a team approach, and it's really getting everybody involved and working out your best strategy. So I'll stop sharing now, and I'm hoping that we'll have some questions going forward.
All right, thank you so much, Irene. Definitely a really, really good talk. We've got some good comments on the chat box as well. I'm just going to share my screen for everyone so that they can have a link to the QR code for a Q&A section. But definitely one thing that we can take from your talk is that because you've got a really wide recruitment numbers, it is very essential and important to develop your own network and connections and maximize digital platform. So my question would be related to data management. So obviously you've got a really big amount of recruitment. So you're looking at 428,000 and more participants. And we all know what comes after recruitment is a big bulk of data. So how does your team aim or plan to manage this big amount of data moving forward?
So we've got a very robust database, and we've got various groups working with us. So we're looking at various aspects within this study. We're looking at mortality. We're also looking at patient acceptability. We're looking at the impact this test has on patients going forward. And really, we hope that using this test, a lot of the information coming through will influence the way NICE sees it as well. So we're handling a lot of data and how we progress it. And I think one of the key things is is making sure that you build in how you're going to collect that data, and having a robust database to collect that and store it, and really look at how you're going to analyze that data, and having the right people on board to do that analysis for you.
Okay, and we've got really good, interesting question here. So have you been able to check that recruitment population reflects the diversity of the disease populations?
So yeah, we're working on that. As you know, most of our trials kind of stemmed within Cambridge, and Cambridge is quite a research orientated population, and people tend to take part. But in some of the areas where we've had diverse population, and we've worked with other teams, and I think this is because diversity is kind of up. It's much made more open, and we're trying to really see best ways of doing that. I think it's a bit early to kind of make that analysis of, whether what we're doing is working or not, because it's very earlier on. But we're trying all the different avenues to kind of improve that diversity. And really, we're looking at posts. We've got a study at the moment, which is the data has only just come in. So we're waiting for that analysis to happen to see the impact it's had on diversity. So maybe more to come following the analysis of that study.
Okay. And another really good question. So regarding patients known to be interested in research, is it ethically okay to contact them about a new study? And do you have a patient database for best for a trial?
Yes. So most of our studies has on their consent form, if they've taken part in one trial, we have a statement on that consent form to say whether they'd be willing to take part in future research or other clinical trials, and then they sign up. And so those patients go onto a database, and we log that in. We log that that interest, and so then we can go back to them. I mean, it doesn't bind them to taking part, and I always say to patients, look, we'll contact you, but it doesn't, you don't have to take part if at that time and place you think it's not appropriate for you, it's not binding. So I think, yes, we do keep a database of patients, and that's with patients' consent, of course, and GDPR, just following all those regulations and we do contact it, but we don't hold them to it if they don't want to take part.
Okay, so we just got one room for the last question. So do you have a patient-facing material like PIS posters translated in different language? If yes, how do you manage receiving consent in another language, not English?
So we've worked on that. I think we were looking at so I also was the lead for the lead nurse for the ACE cohort, and we were looking at that to see whether we could translate our patient information sheet, and really whether it will help. And I think for this, we looked at it and we realized that translating some of it would be helpful. But again, you need a translator when you're seeing some of these patients, really, to make sure that the patient understands what they're consenting for. And really that translator has to be independent and not influenced. And I think the majority of patients, I can only speak about the ones we've done in the past, is that they can speak a little bit of English, and usually we can get access to somebody who can help us to translate. One of the key things I need to touch on here was, because we've done trials sort of internationally as well, and have worked so when I went to Tanzania, really trained them up to do the Cytosponge, we had a population there that only that spoke they didn't speak much English, and so we had to depend on the local nurses to kind of take the consent and carry out, do the informed consent, and also carry out the procedure. So there are ways and means to get around that. It's really whether you've got the resources to do that, and really how you facilitate that, whether you employ nurses with a second language, or you kind of employ a translator to help you with that.
Right. Okay, so thank you so much, Irene. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing us your expertise and knowledge in recruiting, and I hope you all the best for your Best 4 trial moving forward.